The Bud Light and Target protests continue, why these protests have been so successful, and what we need to do to continue to win the culture war. All that in this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Matt Mayer. And before we get started, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Help me grow the channel. And please share it with friends and family if you like the content that you see here today. So, over the last couple of months, we've seen some protests when it comes to Bud Light and Target. Bud Light kind of kicked everything off at the beginning of April, and then Target kind of followed after the protests of Bud Light had started. So, I think what people need to do is ask themselves a question: why are these specific protests so successful? And I think the reason for that is many of different reasons, many different factors, and what we need to do as conservatives and people that are trying to win this culture war is make sure that we are focusing our efforts on protests that are going to be successful. I think most people that are out there that are fighting the good fight would tell you the same thing, and that is we cannot protest everything. The left-wing culture within these large corporations is extremely strong and has been for some time now. We're not going to be able to protest every single one of these companies. So what I was thinking about was, how do we decide what we should protest and focus all of our efforts on those particular companies? Again, like I said, we can't protest every single one of them. So I put together somewhat of a template to give us an idea of, or give myself an idea of what companies we should be protesting and when we should be protesting them based on various different factors. I think that there's a number of different reasons why these two particular protests have worked out so well. And I want to take the time and go over some of those reasons here today. What you have here is a spreadsheet of a couple different companies that have actually already made a faux pas out there, and a couple of examples of where things would work and where things kind of wouldn't work. Now, I did this on a 100-point scale, a little bit more weight towards a couple of different categories. So if you see there in column B, you got the offense, how bad was the offense that was committed, and these are all going to be relative. So if you look at the Bud Light, I put a 9.5, and you see InBev right below that at 8. So kind of counting the exact same thing that they did with regards to the Dylan Mulvaney sponsorship of Bud Light. It carries more weight with Bud Light than the rest of their brands, if that makes sense. So InBev has probably a couple of dozen different brands, and each one of them is not the exact same as Bud Light. Now, Bud Light is a brand that's primarily geared towards working class Americans, and as they said in there, or the former VP of their marketing said, geared towards frat boys. So the level of offense is definitely going to have to be relative to the market that they're trying to capture. So I know that there was, and I don't have this on the sheet here, but if everyone remembers that Balenciaga, which is like a high-end fashion brand to my knowledge, I think you look at that as it was very egregious what they did. However, when it comes to the people that consume their product and they market their product to, the level of offense is lower because they tend to be a little bit more left-leaning, if that makes sense. So when it comes to Bud Light, I think they tend to be more right-leaning, working class, and shoving a man who's masquerading as a woman as their spokesperson was a pretty big faux pas. Again, these are all going to be out of 10. The first two categories, the offense and the convenience, are going to be weighted 3 times. The relative quality will be weighted twice. And then the last two columns, consumability and trackability, and I'll go over those as well. Those are rated at weighted at a 1x. So Bud Light, the offense that they had, I'm putting an estimate of a 9.5. That's a fairly bad strategy for the people that they're marketing to. Now, the convenience, I put it as a 9. I think a lot of people might put that a little bit higher. And by convenience, I mean convenience of protest, just so everyone knows. Convenience of protest, in this case, I put at a 9. And I think what led me to not give it a 10, because I think most people would think of going to a refrigerator with beer and just grabbing a Miller product or a different product that's in there. There are certain venues that you would go to in the United States, and if you wanted a beer, they only sell Bud or Anheuser-Busch products. And a lot of them would be Bud Light and Budweiser. Most people make that connection with Budweiser being part of the company that is Bud Light. I think most people know that. And that's why for convenience, I put InBev at a 6.5, because their portfolio is so much more vast than just Bud Light, Busch products, things of that vein that are really just Anheuser-Busch. If you're going to protest InBev, there's more research that needs to be done, and then you need to be kind of aware of it when you're at the store trying to buy beer, or if you're out at the bar, whatever, you have to kind of keep track of it. So that makes it a little bit less convenient to protest InBev, in my opinion, because you wouldn't be able to, most people aren't going to either take that step to look at every single one of their brands, and even if they do, they might forget because they have a large portfolio of brands. So now relative quality, this is kind of going to be an inverse. So for Bud Light, I said that their relative quality is an 8.5. So a 10 would be fairly low quality or very replicatable, to say the least. I would say like the most replicatable, or just straight out poor quality. Now, Bud Light, I'm using this not in terms of necessarily their quality of their taste, but how well can other brands kind of replicate what they're doing. I think there's a lot of people out there that would say they don't even really know the difference between Miller Lite, Bud Light, Coors Light. They can just easily pick up another one. There are some other people out there that prefer the taste of one of those. So for that reason, I gave it an 8.5, because there is a difference between Bud Light and some other light beers. And while you might not like Bud Light as much, there are other people out there. So it's not a complete wash where it doesn't even matter. It's just a label that says Bud Light or Miller Lite. They taste the exact same. And that's not the case in this scenario. So now InBev, you can see I gave them a 6.5. Again, there's a lot of different beers out there, and the quality of them are kind of on a ranging scale, but there are alternatives that might be as good or better quality. So it's just a little bit harder to replicate. That's why their number's a little bit higher. And then consumability, that goes to how often are you going to consume this product? Not only once you buy the product, but how often are you going to return to buy that product? So there's a couple of different ways to look at that, and a couple of different variables when it comes to consumability. I gave both an 8.5. If you're somebody who drinks Bud Light, or if you're somebody who drinks beer in general, you're probably going to be going to the liquor store once every week, maybe once every 2 weeks. That's a pretty consumable product, and that gives us an opportunity to really change our behavior. So that's why I gave them an 8.5. It's not something that you necessarily do every week or multiple times a week, but it is something that you do frequent enough that while this is top of mind, you'll be able to change your behavior. So that factors into how people actually buy this product, or how they're actually able to protest. Because if it's something that they're going to do within the next week or two, they will be more likely to remember it than if it's something that they're going to buy 2 or 3 months down the road. They might forget about it, or the anger that they have towards that product or towards that brand may have subsided a little bit. And if, say, for example, if they're on sale, or maybe you really like the particular product that they have, the style, if it's a clothing brand, whatever it might be, you might be more likely to buy it down the road than you would be to buy it right now when the controversy first starts. So that's why I think it's important, the consumability of a product or service, how frequent you actually use it. And then trackability, I put 10 for Bud Light and 9 for InBev. Most of these companies are going to be publicly traded companies, so while I went over in one of my last videos when I talked about this. You're not going to get an exact estimation just based on the increase or decrease of the stock price to say how their sales are really being affected by this protest. Some of it's just market sentiment, some of it's just speculation, but it allows this product to be in the news more frequently. Now, with Bud Light, there's a company called Bump Williams, I believe, that's tracking the sales of alcohol for every single week, and they post it every single week. So that's about as trackable as it comes. If you're going to be, if you could find a reliable source that's going to give you sales numbers on a weekly basis, it's really going to be pretty trackable. And the reason I put InBev, even though InBev would be part of that, is because there's several different brands. As I mentioned before, they have over a dozen different brands that you'd have to track and really kind of add that up. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but a specific brand like Bud Light makes it a little bit easier. So that's kind of where I have this in terms of how easy and how effective the protest was going to be on Bud Light, or could be on Bud Light. And you see the total score over there at a 91. Again, that's factoring in a 3x for the first two categories, a 2x for the third category, and then just a 1x for the last two categories. I think that the reason, and I'll point this out, why the level of the offense and the convenience factor in is because, or why I weighted them so much, is if something isn't as outrageous, let's say it's somewhere in that the 50% or less of the consumers that it could potentially offend find it offensive enough to protest it, it's just not going to carry as much steam. So let's just say it's posting a Pride Progress flag or something like that. I think most people might just be like, yeah, that's, I don't agree with it. If they're on of that mindset where they don't like the companies getting too political, but it's not anything too bad. Whereas having a transgender woman promote the beer for working class Americans, that's just something that doesn't really register as acceptable with the people that consume the product. So that's why I think the offense matters, because again, if it's something that not as many people find offensive, they might find great offense in what a company did or did not do. But if the vast majority of conservatives don't find it as offensive, it's not going to be as effective. So that's why it carries a lot of weight. And then the convenience of it too. If you're living in a small town, and let's say, I have Target here is the next one, and Target's really the only one that's in your neighborhood, it's going to be hard to protest Target in that particular scenario. You're going to have to kind of piece together a couple of different stores that you can go to. Now, the reason I have the convenience for Target as a 6 is because in most urban areas where there's a Target, there's a Walmart. And they're pretty similar. Maybe Target has slightly better quality, so I put the relative quality at an 8. I don't think I think most people that shop at Target feel that it's a better quality or better quality shopping experience than Walmart. I know people like my wife prefer Target to Walmart, but in recent weeks we've kind of switched going back to Walmart, which we used to do a number of years ago. Then the consumability is 9. I think it's about as consumable as of a place as you would find out there. It's a retailer. Obviously, you're consuming the products that they sell and the service that they provide. With them having things like groceries and all of different kind of like toiletries, things of that nature, these are things that you need on a regular basis. And if you're a consumer that shops at Target, you probably go there once a week. So that's why it's a 9. It could, in theory, be a 10. Depending on the shopping habits of any particular person. But I think, speaking for most of the people that consume products from Target, a 9 is pretty appropriate. And then trackability, again, it being a public company, it doesn't have quite the, at least I haven't seen the reporting that I've seen on Bud Light from a company like Bump Williams, but it being out there in the public space, it being a publicly traded company, there's going to be a lot of articles tracking the ups and downs of the stock and keeping you kind of involved. So I think trackability and consumability are, even though I don't have them as important as the other categories, they're still very important. If we're going to succeed in the culture war, people are going to want to see the fruits of their labor. Like, are we actually making a difference in a protest? And the trackability's got to be something that everyone sees. So if you look at the total there on the right, it's 80.5 points. And, again, this is I just put this together last week. So I'm still kind of working out where I think the sweet spot is to, I guess, a threshold of where I think a protest would be successful, and kind of make my recommendation based on that whenever one of these big controversies come up. So Adidas, I have that down there, and I'm not going to go into as much detail with Adidas, but that number is a little bit lower than you might see Target. And I think even though the offense isn't as big, it's still fairly offensive to a lot of people, having a man in a women's swimsuit and trying to sell that. Convenience is 9.5. I don't think that there's really much more convenient than something like that, but I put it at 9.5, just leave a little wiggle room. Consumability is a 3. Again, this is something that you don't buy every day, you don't buy every week, you don't buy every month. So the outrage that might be there today wouldn't necessarily be there down the road. So consumability is going to bring it down. And then trackability, we have to keep in mind the sales cycle of a lot of these places. A place like Adidas or a company like Adidas might have more sales come the wintertime just because of the holidays and them being gifts. So that's another thing that matters. If they're kind of off their sales cycle and they do something somewhat egregious like this, you might not see as much about that particular item during that time frame because of that. So I know in this particular case, you might say going into summer, it makes it a little bit more trackable, but I'm just saying overall the trackability of something like Adidas, if they were to come out with something like this in, say, February, it's past the holidays, it's before the summer. By the time the summer came around and really could affect their sales, you might not see much of an impact on that. So that's why I would rate that a little bit lower. Now, I gave an example here, and if you look at line 6 where it says the supplement, so I just put like a generic supplement company, and I was thinking in my mind, what is kind of like the most egregious thing? Give an example. Now, the two below there, I put Amazon and Volkswagen. I'm not going to give a specific made-up example. I'm just saying if this were to be a 10 on the scale, look at how well a protest might work against companies such as those. But in this case, for the supplement company, I was thinking of a supplement company that would market a particular product as an all-natural way to build muscle and using Elliot Page as their spokesperson. That's about as egregious as I can think of off the top of my head. Not only trying to say that this is an all-natural way to build muscle, which Elliot Page, for those of you who don't know, is Ellen Page, who used chemicals to artificially look like a man, to look more like a man, and is not a very well-built man at that. It doesn't have very much muscle tone. It doesn't surprise me, seeing as Elliot Page was Ellen Page for 30-plus years of her life. So that would be about as big of an offense. You got to think about the people that are trying to build muscle naturally. You shove somebody who unnaturally transition themselves to look like a man and try to sell this supplement, and on top of it does not look like somebody that you would strive to be looking like if you're trying to build muscle mass. So that would be as egregious as I could think. The convenience on this hypothetical supplement company would be pretty easy, about as easy as I could think of. Most of these places you'd have to go to like a GNC. Some of these things are sold at like a Walmart or a Target, something along those lines, and usually it's in a wall of different supplements. So it's very easy to then just go pick up another supplement. Relative quality, this is, again, I just made this up. I just said, hey, maybe they have a pretty good quality. It's not super easy to replicate, but it can be replicated. There are other options out there. at that price point that are almost as good or close to as good. And then consumability, I put an 8, even though this is something that you would take generally on a daily basis. It typically, when you buy these, you end up buying them in like a month's worth supply. So that's something that you wouldn't have to buy every week. So to change your buying habits, it would be a little bit less convenient than, say, something of Target that you might go to every week. This might be something you go to every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, something like that. And then trackability, again, just throwing a number out there. I don't know exactly what it would be. Let's say it's a publicly traded company. It would have to be a publicly traded company to be able to track the stock and then see more articles about it. If it was a private company, you wouldn't see nearly as much when it came to the reporting on the numbers. The numbers wouldn't really be out there. You wouldn't have a stock to follow. So that's why I put it at a 9. But in this hypothetical scenario, you see a 92 on that scale, which is about as high as Bud Light. It's actually higher than Bud Light in this particular instance. So I think that those are the types of things that you'd have to look at, is something that's extremely egregious and extremely convenient. You see both 10s on that scale, and then really from that point on, it makes it extremely, extremely easy to protest it. Now, relative quality, it might be something that has the absolute best quality and there's no competitor, but in most cases, if they do have that quality, the convenience on it would tend to be a little bit lower. So for the Amazon example, again, try to speed this up here, but how offensive was it? Say it was a 10, but the people that consume Amazon, and I put it at a 1.5, that realistically could be as low as a 1, because the people that use Amazon aren't looking to get up off their couch and order something. Now, there are instances where you can go to the local drugstore or local retailer and pick something up, but in a lot of cases, something that you order, you'd have to go pretty far just to pick it up, and it's going to be on your doorstep the next day. The relative quality is a 1. That being, there's really nothing else like Amazon at this point in time. You pay $15 a month. Everything shows up at your door the next day. It includes a streaming service with some fairly unique content, as well as the ability to rent and buy digital copies of movies. Amazon Prime there's really nothing to compare it to. So that's why on the relative quality scale, I gave it a 1, meaning its quality is second to none. There's really no other place out there like it. So it's really hard to protest it would be really hard to protest a place like Amazon, even if they made the most egregious faux pas when it came to conservatives out there, just spat in the faces of all their consumers. I don't think that you would see anywhere near the backlash just because of its convenience and quality versus the market. And then consumability is a 10. Again, it's something that you could change your habit pretty quickly. Most people that use Amazon, such as myself, use it multiple times a week. So it doesn't really get much more consumable that. Again, we're consuming the service, not necessarily the products. There's a bunch of different vendors that offer different products there. And then trackability, I put an 8. I think that it would be harder to really track everything. They're such a big company and have their hands in so many different arenas. I think it would be hard to say specifically where it's at in terms of the sales and with regards to a protest. That said, you would be able to track it fairly decently, it being a publicly traded company. And if there was a serious protest on it, I would assume that would be covered pretty frequently. And then the last example here is just I put Volkswagen, a car company. Let's say again they made something really offensive. The convenience is I put it as a 7. I think again you have to realize I'm talking about the people that buy Volkswagens. How convenient or inconvenient in this case would it be to switch from Volkswagen to another car? It would be relatively convenient. Most of the times there's an auto mall, but at the same time, there's a reason why the people that buy Volkswagens do buy them. They like the quality for the most part. They are a fairly high quality car when it comes to just relative terms. Your everyday cars, not obviously your luxury cars. They do have Audis, which is their luxury brand, which is still a fairly nice car. Again, the relative quality is a 4, and that's relative to their consumers. There's a reason why these people buy these cars. They like these cars. It's not going to be easy for them to just get off Volkswagen if they're a loyal consumer. The consumability, in this case, is clearly going to be very, very low as you can go. I put it at a 1. Most people don't get a car every few years. So if there was something that happened and you just bought a Volkswagen last 6 months, you're probably not going to sell it. And it's going to be a few years before you get another one. By then, a lot of the outrage would probably that you might have had would probably fall by the wayside. And then here trackability, I put a 6. I think it's just because of its sales cycle and how quickly cars turn around, it makes it a little bit more difficult to track a real-time protest of this brand. So when you look at what we have here in terms of how effective a particular protest is going to be, I think you can see by what I kind of threw together, there's various grades of how well a protest is going to work. Now, in this case, we have to stay focused on the ones that are currently protesting and ones that have a higher score. Again, I will, as the weeks and months move on, I will try to find a sweet spot of saying, hey, over this number, this is where, a protest would make sense. Now, let's say Miller Coors were to do something that people did not agree with. I think unless it was unbelievably egregious, I think it makes sense to just kind of stay focused on the one that's currently working. Maybe a secondary protest of Miller Coors. You go to the fridge, don't buy the Bud Light. If you can avoid Miller Coors, then avoid Miller Coors. If not, then Miller Coors would be the option in this hypothetical scenario. Can't protest everything. Most people are not gonna completely give up if they're a beer drinker. Completely give up drinking beers. You got Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and then you have Miller Coors. How many other places are really out there making beer? You're going to be pretty limited in your selection from that point on. So I think that's the way that these need to be approached. Now, I mentioned long-term what the strategy has to be. And you look at all this stuff that's coming down, like was it something that is it coming from the bottom up of corporations or the top down? And certainly going to be something that's coming from the top down. But why is every corporation seemingly have this extremely left-leaning tilt to it? And that comes from the shareholders of these large organizations. You look at most of the large tech companies, most of the large retailers being left-leaning or pretty left-leaning, and their largest shareholders are typically 4 culprits, which is BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity. In a lot of cases, they hold 20-25% of the stock combined, and these are asset management companies that I think a lot of people have a Vanguard fund, which would be something that you would see in a 401k. They are voting with your vote by proxy. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, so this is not financial advice. But if possible, look into switching your 401k or whatever your retirement fund is to a different asset management company. Now, a place like BlackRock has $10 trillion under assets. It's going to take a while to chip away at what they have in terms of asset management and the sway that they have with regards to these culture wars. But they do have a lot of sway, and starting to take away as much as we can of their power is going to be something that long-term will pay off dividends. Now, this is going to have to be a concerted effort. It's not going to be this instant gratification like the Bud Light and the Target protests where you see it all over the news. It's going to take an effort from conservative people to take their assets, their wealth, and move it over to different asset management companies. Because again, at BlackRock holding 7-8% of a large corporation, they have a big say over how that corporation is run. And they're a pretty left-leaning corporation. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, and he recently came out and said this. I'm going to play this video right now.
you now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
So in that video, you see Larry Fink talking about forcing changing behavior. He's talking about cramming ESG guidelines down corporations' throats, which they've been doing for years. Now, these 4 culprits, and there's more than just them, are all of the left-wing persuasion. The best way, in my estimation, to do it is we need another Elon Musk move where Elon buys up a company like BlackRock. Because if you look at their assets, the number of assets under management is $10 trillion. However, their market capitalization is about $100 billion. Now, most people don't have $100 billion lying around. Elon Musk is somebody that could potentially come up with that money, and he did it with Twitter before. Maybe it's something down the road that Elon decides to do, because you've heard him voice his opinion on ESG, saying that it's a crime against humanity or a huge scam, whatever it was that he said. I don't want to put words in the man's mouth. But he sees what's going on with these corporations. So the one thing we can do individually is move our funds from a Vanguard fund, from Fidelity, wherever we can. Do your research. Again, this is not financial advice, but do your research. Find a asset management company that's more politically aligned with your values, and let them have your proxy vote versus a place like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity. That is a little piece of the puzzle that if the more people that do that, the less sway that they have in the markets, and then the more sway that we would have on the other end with this more conservative leaning asset management company, giving them our proxy vote, changing the lean of these corporations from left-leaning to neutral, which is where they should be. It should be all in the best interest of returning shareholder value, not this ESG nonsense, making sure that we have the most diverse boards. It doesn't matter how diverse your board is. You want to get the most qualified candidates. They could all be black, they could all be white, they could all be Asian. It doesn't matter. You want the most qualified candidates, and that's what your asset management company should be striding for, not checking boxes and having diversity for the sake of diversity. So that said, it's going to take some time when it comes to this political tilt that we have. There has to be a huge change in management at these large asset management companies, or you have to have something like an Elon Musk or a group of billionaires that have the same worldview as Elon Musk to buy out these corporations. So that said, it's been very encouraging over the last couple of months, the vigor in which the conservative movement has protested these organizations. Keep at it. Again, I've said this before. I'll keep saying it. Don't get violent. It's so funny. I heard something the other day about Target claiming that this is akin to January 6th, a corporate protest of January 6th, whereas January 6th, the protesters and the people that were rioting went into the Capitol. In this case, we're staying out of their building, and yet somehow this is something of some form of violence by not stepping foot in their organization. No, we're just not spending our money with your organization because we disagree with your values. And if you would just stay down the middle, we would go back and shop, make an apology, put yourself back in the center of politics, stay out of politics, and conservatives will continue to shop in your store. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in again. Again, I'm your host, Matt Mayer. If you like the content, hit the like button, subscribe, share with friends and family, help me grow. Until the next video, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.